Hello, my name is Levi Leland, and I'm here at the historic North Burial Ground in Providence, Rhode Island, where I'm fortunate enough to serve as a docent for this incredible cemetery. I'm standing at the grave of Providence's most beloved poetess, Sarah Helen Whitman, who was born on this day, January 19th, in 1803. She was born in her grandfather's house here in the city to Nicholas and Anna Power. Her grandfather, Nicholas Power's father, was one of the first settlers in this city. The Powers lived with pride in their family name, and Sarah Helen shared this pride, studying her genealogy in her later years. As a young girl, she would walk down to the wharves of the Seekonk River, right near her home, and she would watch the trade ships come in and out, and she would take in all the magnificent smells of the foreign teas and spices. She had a humble education growing up and really exhibited a lofty intelligence from early on that would only develop further as she got older. As Helen celebrated her 6th birthday, a boy was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and that boy's story would eventually meet Helen's. This boy's name was Edgar Poe, born to traveling actors David Poe Jr. and Elizabeth Arnold Poe. Poe's early years weren't nearly as picturesque as Sarah Helen Whitman's. He was orphaned in Richmond, Virginia at the age of 2 after his father abandoned the family and his mother died of consumption. He was then split from his 2 siblings and taken in by the wealthy Allan family, where he was fostered but never formally adopted. He was baptized and given the middle name that would go down to posterity, Edgar Allan Poe. In 1828, at the age of 25, Sarah Helen married John Winslow Whitman, a student at Brown University who was studying to become a lawyer. They moved to Boston, where Helen was able to pursue a career in writing through her husband's affiliations with 2 separate publications. While in Boston, Helen was introduced to many progressive ideals of the time that she would actively be a part of throughout her whole life, including abolition, women's suffrage, animal rights, and transcendentalism. This blissful life for Sarah Helen Whitman did not last long, however. After only 5 years of marriage, John Winslow Whitman died after complications from a cold. And Helen moved back to Providence, where she remained here a widow for the rest of her life. By 1845, when Edgar Allan Poe first laid eyes on Sarah Helen Whitman during his first visit to Providence, he was well established in literary circles, known for his criticism, essays, poetry, and of course his short stories. He had single-handedly invented the mystery genre with the publication of Murders in the Rue Morgue in 1841. He pioneered the science fiction genre, and he perfected the horror story. His poetry was known throughout the country, and his famous Raven had just made its debut in January of that year. Poe gained a lot of fame, but never any fortune. He struggled his entire life to make a living solely on his writing. Poe's first visit to this city was during his attendance at a lecture of another literary lady, Frances Osgood. After the lecture, Poe and Osgood took a walk through the east side, where they eventually found themselves on Benefit Street. And there, Sarah Helen Whitman immediately arrested Poe's attention. As she was tending her rose garden in the backyard of her home, clad all in white, with a veil over her face, her beauty almost looked ghostly in a way, and it was the perfect aesthetic for Mr. Poe. Osgood offered to introduce him to her, but he adamantly declined. Frances Osgood knew Sarah Helen Whitman and was friends with her, so she offered to introduce Poe to her right on the spot. Of course, as I said, Poe declined this introduction, but Sarah Helen Whitman left a perpetual mark on Poe's mind that he would carry with him over the next 3 years. In 1848, Helen coincidentally attracted the attention of Poe by writing him a Valentine poem in February of that year, not having known that Poe had laid eyes on her 3 years prior while she was in her rose garden. Helen's poem was titled To E.A. Poe and paid tribute to Poe's genius and, of course, his incredibly famous Raven, where she even romantically refers to him as the ebony bird itself. Raven, from the dim dominions on the night's Plutonian shore, Oft I hear thy dusky pinions wave and flutter round my door. See the shadow of thy pinions float along the moonlit floor. Often from the oak woods glooming, round some dim ancestral bower, in the lurid distance looming, some high solitary tower. I can hear thy storm cry booming through the lonely midnight hour. When the moon is at the zenith, thou dost haunt the moated hall, where the marish flower greeneth over the waters like a pall, where the house of usher leaneth darkly nodding to its fall. There I see thee dimly gliding, see thy black plumes waving slow, in its hollow casements hiding, when their shadow yawns below, to the sullen tarn confiding the dark secrets of their woe. See thee when the stars are burning, in their cressets silver clear, when Ligeia's spirit yearning from the earth life wanders near, when Morella's soul returning weirdly whispers, I am here. Once within a realm enchanted, on a far isle of the seas, by unearthly visions haunted, by unearthly melodies, where the evening sunlight slanted golden through the garden trees, where the dreamy moonlight dozes, where the earthly violets dwell, listening to the silver closes of a lyric loved too well. Suddenly, among the roses like a cloud thy shadow fell. Once where Ulalume lies sleeping, hard by Auber's haunted mere, with the ghouls a vigil keeping on that night of all the year, came thy sounding pinion sweeping through the leafless woods of Ye Weir. Oft with Proserpine I wander on the night's Plutonian shore, hoping, fearing while I ponder on thy loved and lost Lenore, on the demon doubts that sunder soul from soul forevermore, trusting, though with sorrow laden, that when life's dark dream is over, by whatever name the maiden lives within the mystic lore, Eros in that distant Aden shall his Charminion meet once more. Poe replied to this tribute by sending Helen a poem he had written in his youth, conveniently titled, To Helen. Helen, thy beauty is to me like those Nicean barks of yore that gently o'er a perfumed sea the weary wayworn wanderer bore to his own native shore. On desperate seas long wont to roam, thy hyacinth hair, thy classic face, thy Naiad airs have brought me home to the glory that was Greece, and to the grandeur that was Rome. Lo, in yon brilliant window niche, how statue-like I see thee stand, the agate lamp within thy hand. Ah, Psyche, from the regions which are Holy Land. The beauty and structure of that poem is unmatched. However, Helen didn't reply to the tribute, so Poe sent her another poem written specifically to her. The poem reminisces Poe's first sight of her in her rose garden on Benefit Street when he first came to Providence, and it began, I saw thee once only, years ago. I must not say how many, but not many. It was a July midnight, and from out a full-orbed moon that, like thine own soul soaring, sought a precipitate pathway up through heaven, there fell a silvery silken veil of light with quietude and sultriness and slumber upon the upturned faces of 1,000 roses that grew in an enchanted garden, where no wind dared to stir unless on tiptoe, fell on the upturned faces of those roses that gave out in return for the love light their odorous souls in an ecstatic death, fell on the upturned faces of these roses that smiled and died in this parterre, enchanted by thee and by the poetry of thy presence. By September 1848, Poe is in Providence for the second time, and this time courting Sarah Helen Whitman. The two spent their time in the Providence Athenaeum and walking Swan Point Cemetery, and it's not totally out of the question that Helen could have brought Poe right here to this very spot to see the graves of her prominent ancestors. After numerous proposals of marriage from Poe to Helen and numerous rejections from Helen to Poe, She finally agreed to a union on the condition that Poe abstain from alcohol. It was a vice she knew that he struggled with not only throughout his whole life, but already during his brief time in Providence. So Poe vowed sobriety, and they planned to wed on Christmas Day at St. John's Cathedral, the historic church that's located right in the back of Sarah's home on Benefit Street. Unfortunately, just days before the wedding was set to occur, an anonymous note was passed to Helen while she was at the Athenaeum. And this note told her that Poe had broken his vow of sobriety and he was seen intoxicated at his hotel. To this day, we don't know who delivered it, and we don't know who arranged for it to be passed, but it was no secret that Helen's friends and family strongly detested Poe's courtship with Sarah Helen Whitman, let alone a marriage. We're not even sure if Poe actually did break his vow of sobriety, and if he really was seen intoxicated at his hotel, and if the note was just a blatant sabotage. Either way, the wedding was off. Helen had confronted Poe about the note later that evening at her home, and he tried to defend himself, but to no avail. He departed Providence that night, and they never saw each other again. Less than a year later, in October of 1849, Poe died in Baltimore under mysterious circumstances at the age of 40. The conqueror worm had come, as told in one of his most ominous poems. Lo, 'tis a gala night, within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng bewinged bedight in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theater to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they who come and go, at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. That motley drama, oh, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased forevermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth into the self-same spot, and much of madness and more of sin and horror the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout, a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food, and seraphs sob at vermin fangs and human gore imbued. Out, the lights out all, and over each quivering form, the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy Man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. Helen was devastated by the news of Poe's passing, and she spent the rest of her life defending his character and relishing in her connection to him. A large portion of her poetry was written in honor of him, and one especially poignant dirge titled Resurgamus was more than enough sentiment from his brief Providence sweetheart. I mourn thee not, no words can tell the solemn calm that tranced my breast, when I first knew thy soul had passed from earth to its eternal rest. For doubt and darkness over thy head forever wave their condor wings, and in their murky shadows bred forms of unutterable things. And all around thy silent hearth, the glory that once blushed and bloomed was but a dim remembered dream of the old time entombed. Those melancholy eyes that seemed to look beyond all time, or turned on eyes they loved, so softly beamed. How few their mystic language learned, how few could read their depths or know the proud high heart that dwelt alone in glorious places of woe, like Eblis on his burning throne. For no human heart could brook that darkness of thy doom to share, and not a living eye could look unscathed upon thy dread despair. I mourn thee not, life had no lore, thy soul in Morphean dews to steep, love's lost nepenthe to restore, or bid the avenging sorrow sleep. Yet, while the night of life shall last, while the slow stars above me roll. In the heart's solitudes I keep a solemn vigil for thy soul. I dread dim colostral aisles where all beneath are solemn sounding graves, while over the oriel like a pall a dark funeral shadow waves. There, kneeling by a lampless shrine, alone amid a place of tombs, my erring spirit pleads for thine, till light along the orient blooms. Oh, when thy faults are all forgiven, the vigil of my life outwrought, in some calm altitude of heaven, the dream of thy prophetic thought. Forever near thee, soul in soul, near thee forever, yet how far? May our lives reach love's perfect goal in the high order of the star. Helen lived to the age of 75 before dying peacefully in 1878 at the home of her friends and caretakers, the Daly family, right here in Providence. And finally, these two romantic poets, whose lives always seemed to parallel but never quite intersected, met once again in that high order of the stars. And today, we remember and celebrate these two brilliant minds of the 19th century. So a happy 213th birthday, Edgar Allan Poe, and a happy 219th birthday to you, Mrs. Sarah Helen Whitman. Ave atque Valet. Thank you.